CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
This is Charles Barkley, and you're listening to Tim Graham and Friends.
Welcome to an NFL Honors / Pro Football Hall of Fame induction / Super Bowl / high school basketball player dunking in a girls' game / Sabres have won 4 straight edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. We have a lot to get to. We're going to talk about all those things. I just want to mention her name off the top. Madison Francis, Lancaster High, dunked in a game against Williamsville North this week. Possibly Western New York sports history. We'll get into that. Jonah's been doing the research on it, but we'll talk about that later on. I want to start off with Josh Allen winning the MVP. Everybody's talking about it. I don't necessarily want to get into anything specific. I want to just look at this holistically, what it means for Western New York. A lot of people emotional about this. I was pleasantly surprised to see Josh Allen get it. He would have been my vote if I were on the panel for all kinds of reasons that we've discussed on this podcast, all kinds of reasons that I've written at The Athletic. I had a back and forth debate style piece with Jeff Zrebick, who covers the Baltimore Ravens for The Athletic towards the end of the season about who deserved it. I stated the case for Josh Allen, and I was pleasantly surprised. But it's created quite the debate today. I've had a chance to see a couple of the talking head shows and read some of the articles about should the best quarterback in the NFL, as voted on by the same exact panel, switch their votes to Josh Allen from Lamar Jackson for the MVP. I think it's a worthwhile discussion. And I want to also throw in Saquon Barkley as who was selected the NFL's offensive player of the year by the same panel. It's a muddled thing. But anyway, Jonah, I think we're in agreement here that we're okay with it going to different people, but I also understand the debate. Your thoughts on Josh Allen surprising much of the sports punditry community by winning the MVP over Lamar Jackson?
Well, I think Josh Allen's absolutely a deserving MVP, and especially we saw it up close. There might be a bit of a hometown bias from people like us that watched all of the games and do cover and saw how important he was to the Bills, and maybe nationally just don't have that kind of intimate knowledge of things like that. But I think the voters were well aware of how many Pro Bowl players, teammates that Lamar Jackson had versus Josh Allen, and how vital he was to their success. I also think Lamar Jackson had, every bit of an MVP season, especially statistically. And I don't have really any problem with any voters that decided to split the vote. We had been told how rare that was, that in the past, the first team All-Pro quarterback usually won the MVP, did not lose an MVP to another quarterback. And I think that set a lot of us up to thinking when that All-Pro team came out that Josh Allen would not win the MVP. And I think that made it maybe a bit of a more, meaningful and, feel-good moment for Bills fans watching that, not sure if he was going to win or not last night, and him actually getting the award. And I really don't have any problem if someone, split the hair between most valuable player and maybe a most outstanding player in the All-Pro. And I don't know, maybe you disagree with this. I really don't have a problem if someone split their votes so that, both of these guys get some recognition. Everybody gets a trophy. I think there were two, if not three or four MVP caliber seasons this year, and more than one first team all pro caliber quarterback season. And if there was, a way to get both of these players that acknowledgement. And my last point on Josh Allen, I do think Josh Allen deserved it for everything he did this season. And I think on balance, he's been equal or better than Lamar Jackson in their careers. And for him to get his first MVP, or for Lamar Jackson to get his third MVP before Josh Allen got a single MVP, I don't think necessarily would have been right. So Josh Allen had the narrative case, even if maybe statistically and math and algorithms and formulas might have pointed to Lamar Jackson having a somewhat better season on the field.
Yeah, I think that all that is part of the reason why Josh Allen won it over Lamar Jackson. Maybe a little bit of Lamar Jackson fatigue, like you say, able to justify giving it to one guy over the other. But what I want to at least broach, again, I also agree Josh Allen deserved it. As far as the notion of a hometown bias, I did not think he deserved it last year. A lot of Bills fans and media, some media, I guess, not enough. I know Aaron Schatz at Football Outsiders said that Josh Allen had the better year. He had more touchdowns, and some of the statistics were very heavy in Josh Allen's favor, with the exception of giveaways. But I didn't think Josh Allen deserved it last year, not even close, because he played like I'm trying to think of a different word. I always keep coming back to the word zombie. He was just, excuse me. MVPs don't get their offensive coordinators fired 2 months into the season. MVPs don't make fans wonder what happened to this guy. Where did he go 2 months into the season? MVP candidates don't have you flirting with playoff elimination in November and early December. So Josh Allen as the MVP, yeah, when you got to the end of the year, he came on strong. He piled up a lot of stats, but he wasn't it for 10 games into the season, over half of the season. When the Bills were 5-5 is when they fired Ken Dorsey. The Bills looked lost at times. So no, I don't feel like this was a homer or a homer type situation for us as we're discussing the merits of Josh Allen winning the MVP.
What I think, just to clarify real quick, I think, and more so maybe Bills fans and some other media, I think there's a proximity informational bias of those of us that watch every single play and were around the team all year long and viewing it through a Josh Allen having an MVP season prism without having that much attention on Lamar Jackson or Saquon Barkley or Joe Burrow. Because I think in Buffalo, it was considered that Josh Allen locked up the MVP months ago, and there really shouldn't even be a debate
but
or
also
an
should
argument.
be pointed out that there's only one voter of the 50 who is from Buffalo. So it's not as though it was the voters spoke and they had Josh Allen winning the MVP. And these are varied and, of different experiences and from different regions, and, may have only seen a handful of games of Josh Allen on TV because they're busy covering their teams. So, no, I don't think that played into it at all. But the dynamic of the panel voting for all three awards, and I can almost smell this thinking as it's occurring, is that you sit down and you vote for all these awards, deciding who's going to get what, as opposed to voting for each position within a vacuum, each award within a vacuum, and saying, okay, who deserves it? Because I do believe in general that if you are the number one quarterback in the NFL, then you're probably the number one offensive player in the NFL, and you don't deserve to finish second in MVP to a player who plays your same position. None of that adds up. So what it says to me is that you have a voting panel that sits down and says, okay, how can I make this, make the most number of people happy? Okay, I can give Lamar Jackson the AP, the vote for quarterback. I can give Saquon Barkley the vote for outstanding offensive player. And then Josh Allen, he has no MVPs. Lamar Jackson already has two. You know, my hands are clean. I've, Pontius Pilate, everybody, I did my thing. And, okay, now everybody, be happy. So that doesn't add up. So I agree that Josh Allen deserves the MVP. I also agree that Lamar Jackson deserves first team All-Pro. And I can get to Saquon Barkley deserving offensive player of the year, but only if there's different people voting for them. If the same people, the same exact panel of 50, which is what it is, voting all three different ways for these different awards, it makes sense to me in the way that I painted it. It's that you sit down with an agenda. I am going to try to dole out as many different hardware to different people, so that way I can seem open-minded. And I don't know what. I mean, I don't want to put word, but that's clearly what happened here. So
well, yeah,
that's
but
just
I
my
also
thought
think,
on.
no, I think that some people can think there's a difference in the criteria for most valuable player and the criteria for first team All-Pro. And I think there's a simple statistic that explains why maybe some people changed their vote, or why some people had a different vote for the two different awards. And
For the
this
record,
tracks,
it was nine of the 50 voters changed their first place vote from Lamar Jackson All-Pro to Josh Allen MVP. I just wanted to
sure. Well,
put
this
that out there
happens, I
for.
think, with MVP voting in all the professional sports. Maybe it's not the case with something like the Heisman Trophy or different player of the years at different levels of sport, but with professional MVPs, team success seems to matter a bit more for MVP than it does for All-Pro or All-League or things like that. And Josh Allen's team won more games. A year ago, Lamar Jackson's team won more games. And I don't know if anybody gave a first team All-Pro vote for Joe Burrow, but I think it could have been justified with the way he played. But an MVP vote for Joe Burrow may be a little less justified because of the number of games they won and the season that they also ultimately had, missing the playoffs. And I think that had the Ravens and the Bills won the same amount of games, or if there wasn't a team success tiebreaker there for most valuable player, maybe it would have been stranger if somebody split those votes. But I think because statistically and performance-wise and the different metrics, Lamar Jackson did outperform Josh Allen on balance through the course of an 18-week season. But Josh Allen led his team to greater success. The voting was done before the playoff game, but he won the playoff matchup between the two. And I think had more of an MVP type season with how important he was to the team.
Sure did. And he would have gotten it. I think what did it was 9 Pro Bowlers in Baltimore, Lamar Jackson +8. The Bills had 1, Deion Dawkins, other than Josh Allen. And that's what weighs the value. So who's zooming who, I guess, is the
Aretha Franklin line.
Yeah. So who made who? There's an AC/DC one for you too, while we're at it. So if there's that much star power in Baltimore, then of course Lamar Jackson should have more team success, more statistical success. I mean, Derrick Henry in the backfield, they're a great tight end duo. The Bills allegedly were supposed to have that this year, and they ended up performing below league average. Great receivers, not in the playoffs, but during the season, a great offensive line. And Josh Allen, I think the voters were able to see he was doing more with less. That said, then Josh Allen should be the quarterback on the first team All-Pro. And probably the most outstanding offensive player too. So again, to me, I just quibble with the thinking that if we're going to do these awards, they should be voted on as in a vacuum and not holistically of how can we dole these out to make sure everybody goes home with a trophy.
Yeah, but I do think those narratives and preseason expectations and things like that play into an MVP case don't seem to play into All-Pro quite as much. All-Pro is a bit more, cold looking at the numbers and performance.
But it's the same panel. I'm
but
sorry. I
it's
know
the
I keep
same
harping
panel
on that, but it's like,
picking
can
a
we get some different? I could see if you could say different minds can come to different conclusions. I get that. And we were talking before we came on the air of 1990, when of the four different versions of the MVP award, we're talking about the PFWA and UPI and whoever, I don't know, is Sporting News or whatever. There were four different MVPs that year. I get that, but you have different people voting for it. Okay, that settles it for me. All right, different minds have different opinions, but it's the same 50.
Sure. I don't know. I also like it, and maybe this is arguing against what you're trying to state, but I like the unpredictability of it and the drama. And we have this award show, 4 weeks, 4 weeks after the season ends. And if we just were able to extrapolate who the MVP is from the All-Pro vote, then there isn't much point to having these finalists and making a big show out of it. And now going into future seasons,
but you're not saying the voters are in cahoots with the NFL to put on a good show.
No, but I think it works out for the fan and entertainment experience that, the voters are a little bit unpredictable, or that I don't even know if it's unpredictable. I think there's a difference between most valuable and I would say all pro is maybe more of a most outstanding. It's a slight difference, and oftentimes it is the same player that's most valuable that is most outstanding. But I think if some of the voters made that decision that one player deserved one slot and the other deserved a different slot, I think that's reasonable. And I don't have a big problem with the everybody gets a trophy aspect of it, that, both of these players deserve some hardware last night or from their season, and this is how it shook out.
Is Josh Allen now the greatest quarterback in Bills history? Jim Kelly never won a most valuable player award. And in fact, any of the years he was a finalist, he finished behind a Bills teammate. So according to that, he was not considered the most valuable. When he was considered valuable in the league, he wasn't the most valuable on his team.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was a way for me to split my vote here, I would do it. I disagreed with you a year or two ago, maybe, when I think you wrote that Josh Allen was already the greatest quarterback in Bills history. I do think that winning 4 AFC championships and getting to 4 Super Bowls and the breadth of success over the course of his career that Jim Kelly had makes him the greatest quarterback in Bills history. But it's harder and harder to make that case with the success that Josh Allen has definitely outperformed Jim Kelly as a regular season quarterback, and he's had some really great playoff performances overall, even if it hasn't led to the Super Bowl. But I still think if Josh Allen were to retire tomorrow, I think I would put him maybe right there at the level with Jim Kelly, but not getting beyond Jim Kelly unless he at least gets the team to the Super Bowl one time in his career.
4 straight Super Bowls for Jim Kelly. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer. But Josh Allen's playoff statistics are way better than Jim Kelly's.
Yeah.
So, no, he hasn't gotten to the big game, but he's performed better in the postseason than Jim Kelly has.
Yeah, but winning matters. I mean, maybe we're going to get into a little bit talking about Eli Manning later. I do think Eli Manning's a Hall of Famer because he did win 2 Super Bowls and was the MVP of those 2 Super Bowls. And I do think Jim Kelly holds that championship belt as the greatest quarterback in Bills history, if it's not Jack Kemp, because of
Jack Kemp won championships.
Yep. I mean, and that's what it's all about. And if Josh Allen gets to a Super Bowl, and especially if Josh Allen wins the Super Bowl and wins a championship, then it's a slam dunk case for Josh Allen. But if he never gets there and he never wins a championship, I do think that hangs around. It's like Charles Barkley or Karl Malone or all these different great players that never won a championship. That's an albatross for Josh Allen in his argument of how great he is or how truly great his career is if he never has a championship on his resume.
All right, Jonah, how about this? We're talking about how the difference probably, or at least I stated it, you didn't necessarily voice your agreement, but I think you agree that probably what swung the MVP voting for Josh Allen was the lack of star talent around him and the panel's acknowledgement of those 8 other Pro Bowlers on the Ravens and only 1 other Pro Bowler with the Bills for Josh Allen. What about Jim Kelly's supporting cast? Jim Kelly had Thurman Thomas, the last NFL MVP to wear a Bills uniform before Josh Allen. He had 2 Hall of Fame receivers. He had a center that a lot of people think belong in the Hall of Fame. He had a Hall of Fame coach. He had a Hall of Fame defensive end on the other side, and star power that's not in the Hall of Fame. I already mentioned Ken Hull, Daryl Talley, Steve Tasker. There's all kinds of firepower on those teams. Who on the Hall of Fame that we've seen, and I'm not talking about Von Miller because his Hall of Fame career was cemented before he got to Buffalo. Buffalo will be a blip on his Hall of Fame bio. Who's what Hall of Fame talent is Josh Allen been playing with?
I mean, that's another fair point. And if you look at this year's roster, there isn't
Who's
much
zooming
there.
who?
I mean, I think you could maybe say Stephon Diggs, or at least was close to that level in the past. Von Miller, I don't think was ever healthy in the postseason for the Bills, but was sort of in that caliber for about 10 games of his first season with Buffalo. Yeah, I don't know if the Bills have too many players over the past 5 years that are on the level of Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, or Bruce Smith, but I do think Matt Milano, Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer were all pro players at various points, and that Josh Allen has played with a collective roster that was rather talented, if not quite as talented as the 90s Bills, somewhat close. And the Bills team has performed just about as well in the regular season, and that's not all Josh Allen. This year was probably more because of Josh Allen than in past years, but I think if you put Jim Kelly on these Bills teams, they're about the same level of success, a different style of play. But I don't think that Jim Kelly couldn't win with these Bills teams, nor do I think that Josh Allen couldn't win with the old Bills teams. I think we're splitting hairs. I think they're both equal levels of greatness. But when you're writing these, legends, and when the career is over with, or when it's 50 years down the line, and you're trying to say who was the greatest quarterback in Bills history, I think the one that went to 4 Super Bowls and the one that went to 0 Super Bowls, that is a big factor, even if you can make sub debates as to why there were some differences in that. And with Jim Kelly, I mean, Jim Kelly had AFC Championship games where he did not play well and the offense didn't score any points. He had AFC playoff runs where he didn't even play in 2 of the games, and Frank White led them to victory. So Jim Kelly wasn't the main reason the Bills got to 4 Super Bowls, but he was the quarterback and the key player for a legendary team that got to 4 Super Bowls. And I think Josh Allen needs to get to 1 Super Bowl. And I think I've heard Andre Reed say the same thing. It's the way it is in our modern sports culture, rings culture. And I think that without ever getting to a Super Bowl, I don't think you can definitively say you're the greatest quarterback in Bills history.
Another controversy, which I find amusing, were the Pro Football Hall of Fame announcements last night. Those happened also during the NFL Honors telecast. Really small class this year. But what I was amused by, Eli Manning and the outcry by way too many people that I've seen today, saying, just upset that he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, he's been retired for 5 years, and he hasn't done anything within those 5 years. That's part of the reason why you're supposed to wait. It's to give you added perspective, to see maybe the game changes a little bit. You get a little, you're not, it's like Dan Orlovsky saying that Matthew Stafford is a Hall of Famer the second he won a Super Bowl with the Rams. I don't know about that, but Eli Manning, within the last couple of years, was a popular topic for, does he deserve to be in the Hall of Fame at all? And for some reason, over the last 12 to 24 hours, people are stomping their feet that he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, he did win a pair of Super Bowls, and he was the MVP in both, but he never led the league in a category. He was never all pro. He was never considered the best at his position in the NFL at a given time. Now, granted, he played when Tom Brady and his brother also were around, so it was tough to win those awards. But I think Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan was an MVP, and guys came up and had different awards. It happened. Not for Eli Manning, though. So anyway, I just find it amusing that we've gone from, does the guy deserve to be in at all, to what an injustice that he didn't get in on his first ballot.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of the, outrage of him not getting it on the first ballot. I do think Eli Manning is a Hall of Fame player.
Well, I made the mistake of watching a couple of talking head shows this morning.
Okay.
I should say normally I don't watch them, but I've had a problem with my television over the last week, and the sports are glitchy. Everything else seems fine, but sports are glitchy. So this morning I reset some things with my smart TV and my Wi-Fi and my DirecTV dish and the whole thing. And I was looking for sports to watch, to test it out, and I ended up on Get Up, the ESPN show, and I got sucked in. So I'm sorry. But yeah, so that was a big conversation about pretty much the entire panel thought that Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer, and a couple of them thought it's okay, it's not the first ballot, and a couple of them were upset about it.
I think he's the definition of Hall of Fame player who's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. That there are debates, there are holes in his resume, that he wasn't truly great and slam dunk status, but because he was two-time Super Bowl MVP, Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, I believe, are the only other quarterbacks that have multiple Super Bowl MVPs. And Eli Manning didn't just win those games; he was pretty good, if not great, in those two playoff runs and leading a marquee franchise, the New York Giants, to two championships and one of the most memorable Super Bowl victories, beating the undefeated New England Patriots. I think that does get him in. And he was also pretty good in a lot of other years. He was never first team All-Pro, but he was four-time Pro Bowler, if that means anything. I think he was second team All-Pro once. And the longevity and collection of statistics rank somewhat favorably with Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And I think eventually he gets in, and I think it is proper that Eli Manning gets into the Hall of Fame, but doesn't get in on the first ballot. And there is a little bit of debate, and there is a little bit of sweating it out and kind of making people make the case for him being a Hall of Famer instead of just rubber stamping him in the first year he's eligible.
How Hall of Famey is Eli Manning if his name is Eli Jones and he's not Peyton's brother and Archie's son and in various commercials and TV shows, and he's a pretty funny guy hosting Saturday Night Live back when he played. If he's not this type of creation, this media, I don't want to say media creation because I think he's earned it. He's legitimately talented and funny, and popular. But without that, how do you think that colors whether or not he's a Hall of Famer?
Well, I will say there's an Eli Jones that scored over 1,000 points for NCCC basketball a few years back that might be getting into the Thunderwolves Hall of Fame. So I don't want to slight him and his Hall of Fame credentials, but I do think that's a factor. It is the Hall of Fame, and I think star power is part of, maybe it shouldn't be a big part of it, but I think it's a small part of how it colors these players. And when you're creating Hall of Fame busts and putting players into this canon that years and years later football fans go and try to get the story of the way the game was played. Eli Manning was a #1 overall pick, played his whole career for the New York Giants, one of the premier franchises in the league, won 2 Super Bowls. And yes, he was the brother of another Hall of Fame player and the son of a Hall of Fame quarterback. And he wasn't
Archie's not in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. But still.
His number's retired
famous
by the Saints, I think, is about as big of an honor as he's gotten, but still a legend.
Famous quarterback. And I think that's a little bit of a part of it. It shouldn't get him in if he didn't have Hall of Fame credentials otherwise. But if you're borderline and that's part of it, I even think his personality and media prominence since being retired with his brother and on the Manning cast, again, not something that should put you in the Hall of Fame if you don't have the credentials on the field. But I think it plays a bit of a factor in the fame and the star power. And the fact that Eli Manning just feels to me like a personality and a player and a face that should have his, face bronzed in Canton.
The player who gets brought up a lot when it comes to Eli Manning is Jim Plunkett. He also won a pair of Super Bowls. So people say, well, you win 2 Super Bowls, that's not automatic. Now, Eli Manning was MVP of both of those. Jim Plunkett was MVP of one of them, the first one. Jim Plunkett has a record of 8-2 in the postseason, and he was a Rookie of the Year, former #1 pick. But he had a really rough career until he got to the Oakland Raiders and was a backup. In fact, got into the starting lineup when Dan Pastorini was hurt and ended up just becoming a star, but really not a lot of awards. In fact, I'm looking him up here. He was never even a Pro Bowler, so that maybe shoots his candidacy in the ass, but that's the one that's always brought up. For the record, the Hall of Fame class, only 4 getting in. Eric Allen, the Eagles defensive back, Jared Allen, the edge rusher, most notably of the Vikings, Chargers tight end Antonio Gates, and Packers receiver Sterling Sharp was the seniors candidate. And pretty small class. And there's a lot of people who were surprised about that because there's believed to be a backlog at some positions, and some people are believed to be deserving by various experts. But yeah, I was surprised to see only 4 guys announced last night. Do we want to talk about the Super Bowl? I mean, there's a sea of content out there. Do you have any Super Bowl thoughts, Jonah? Maybe we'll talk about Sabres instead. Something more consequential to the majority of our audience here.
I think with all this talk on this podcast and elsewhere about who's the MVP and who's the all-pro quarterback, that the best quarterback in football is probably playing on Sunday.
Right.
And another really good quarterback.
We didn't even talk about that. What do you think that plays into it? Similar to Michael Jordan, LeBron James. I think Vince Lombardi won 1 Coach of the Year. Bill Belichick only won a couple. I don't know, I'll have to look that up while you answer that. But Kevin Stefanski has 2 Coach of the Year awards. Yeah. Is it just expectations and meeting expectations and you get boring or what?
Well, Patrick Mahomes didn't have an MVP caliber year statistically, and the Chiefs, even though they did have the best record in football, didn't seem to play up to their previous standard in terms of dominating games and things like that. I do think Patrick Mahomes probably had a stronger case to maybe be a finalist and be on ballots and get some votes because of their fourth quarter comebacks and late wins and the way he led this team to the best record and the Super Bowl. But Patrick Mahomes has been an MVP before, and this was probably his weakest season, maybe of all of his seasons as a starter, and definitely weaker than his MVP seasons. And I just don't think him or the Chiefs offense played to the MVP standard that he had set for himself. And maybe that's unfair, but I think that with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and other players having MVP caliber seasons, that I don't think you can just give the MVP to Patrick Mahomes because his team had the most wins and he won the Super Bowl the last 2 years.
Bill Belichick won 3 Coach of the Year awards, but I did double check. Yeah, Vince Lombardi has won has won. He won. I don't think he's going to win one in the future, so I can drop the tense there. But Kevin Stefanski will always have more Coach of the Year trophies than Vince Lombardi.
We haven't done a podcast since the Bills lost that game in Kansas City. I mean, we could probably get way off the rails and go for too long here if we get into all the narratives. But what's your overall take about the Bills not getting over that hump and being able to maybe kick down the door, as Brandon Beane says?
Yeah, great point. And, I think I've decompressed from the season. I've forgotten that we hadn't done an episode since then. I think a lot of this is on Brandon Beane. Like the players that he has drafted earliest came up pretty small in that game. And I'm not saying all of them, but Kaiir Elam never looked like more of a whiff. Dalton Kincaid dropping the pass. Greg Rousseau was invisible. AJ Epinesa didn't do much. Who am I missing? I mean, Keon Coleman, he's a rookie, and Cole Bishop, also a rookie. Big moments. Look, they don't have the experience. I get it. But I'm even just going back a couple of years. Ed Oliver. I think that Brandon Beane needs to do better with the early picks, especially when you have a quarterback with this contract. That's where you need to find your best players through the draft. You can't afford to go out and patch holes in free agency to fix your mistakes with veterans. You need your picks who are going to be on rookie contracts for 4 or 5 years to play well. And it was It was unfortunate. Now, middle round picks, Christian Benford, of course, he got hurt in that game, which is why Kyrie Elam got pressed into service. But yeah, you can go back and look at some of the middle round picks that Brandon Beane has salvaged some of his draft classes. But the early ones, the ones that are supposed to be the biggest difference makers and impact players, weren't that. And they weren't that necessarily throughout the season. I wrote a story about it. One of my wrap-up stories was about the tight ends and how disappointing they were. And it wasn't just the drop at the end of the game in Arrowhead Stadium for Dalton Kincaid. I mean, he had a bad season. Yes, Dawson Knox comes to his defense and talks about the knee injury, but if you're out there on the field, you got to be able to produce. And Brandon Beane did have some pretty, what I thought, as far as from a sport like football, pretty harsh criticism for Dalton Kincaid to say he's got to get stronger to be able to endure. And this is not a rookie he was talking about. This is a guy who is in his second NFL season, and clearly the Bills front office was disappointed with Dalton Kincaid and his ability, his strength they talked about. He wasn't strong enough. He didn't develop into a quality blocker. A big reason why Alec Anderson was brought out there to be the extra blocker on occasion. If Dalton Kincaid can block, you can keep him and Dawson Knox on the field more at the same time. Dawson Knox out snapped Dalton Kincaid. And that's not just because Dalton Kincaid was hurt. I'm talking about possible snaps that the games that you play in. Dawson Knox had a higher percentage of the snaps than Dalton Kincaid did. So again, I'm harping on the tight end position, but it's a position of emphasis that Brandon Beane has had for the last few years. It's why they made Dalton Kincaid such a big part of their offense as a rookie, and the plans that everybody had in him, the consumer confidence in him, talking about whether it be your fantasy football league or the betting public. He came well below his betting props for receptions, for yards, for touchdowns. And in that story, I took a look at the average tight end, and the Bills as a unit came in below the average tight end in the NFL as a unit. So, yeah, it was not good. I mean, Dawson Knox was a former Pro Bowler, and he's making $12.5 million, or that's his cap hit, I think. I mean, he's one of the higher paid Bills players, and he had 22 catches. So anyways, those were disappointments to me. Specific to that game, coaching decisions. I mean, I know that people are a little upset thinking that Steve Spagnuolo outcoached Joe Brady. The referees, the conspiracy theories. I wrote a story about that too, or at least touched on it. I get it. The Bills got some bad spots, but also maybe run some different plays. Maybe stop running the same play over and over again.
Good stuff.
You have nothing to add?
I had a little bit. You did kind of touch on some of the things I was going to respond with. I mean, you mentioned it, but I do think Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid were both playing hurt down the stretch, and because of them being young and a little bit frail's not the word, but weaker professional athletes and some more veteran players, it seemed like they struggled to play hurt, and maybe getting older and more experienced in the league, they can push through that. They're both young enough to really maybe have breakout seasons in the future. So I think the jury's still out on whether those were bad picks. But in Kyrie Elam, it's a lot harder to defend that pick. Kyrie Elam and Dalton Kincaid are not only players the Bills drafted in the first round, but traded up to draft. And I think it underscores the danger in drafting for need. These were all positions that the Bills really needed to get first-round players in those drafts, according to the analysts and their own analysis. And maybe drafting the best overall player ends up being a safer pick, even if it doesn't fit your position. That the way rosters change and the way you can put different players on the field at different spots, especially on offense, that just accumulating the most talent is the best way to approach the first round of the draft and figure out your roster after that. And Brandon Beane often says that's what they're going to do, but in the last 3 first rounds, he's pretty much filled their biggest need. And on draft day, that looks great. It's, they got their biggest need and they got the guy they wanted. But then when they're in the playoffs a couple years later and those players aren't playing like first round picks, you do wonder if maybe different selections should have been made.
And let's also give credit. I mean, there are some first and second day picks that have worked out. I think Ed Oliver overall has worked out, although he did not have a very good season. It was just way too inconsistent. AJ Epinesa, a day two pick that has, he's 54th overall. I would like to have seen him do better in the AFC Championship game. He's in his fifth NFL season. Osiris Torrance, great pick at right guard. He was 59th overall. Cole Bishop's too early to say. James Cook, fantastic pick at 63rd overall. Even if you do think that running backs are a bit overrated and more easily replaceable, James Cook has been above and beyond, I think, for a 63rd overall pick. Terrell Bernard, fantastic as a third round pick. Spencer Brown has turned out, after a shaky start with a lot of questions, has turned out great. Dawson Knox, I think, is overpaid. And apparently, Brandon Beane went out of his way to say what a great leader Dawson Knox is and how he wishes he had more Dawson Knoxes. I get it, but if you're going to pay them all $12.5 million, you're not going to make the playoffs. Dwayne Carter, a rookie, another one that we didn't mention, third round pick, was not on the field for much of the season. Dorian Williams, same thing. He's a third round pick, and that pretty much takes us through all of them. So pretty scattershot, I would say, for Brandon Beane. And the one that you got to get is the one that they did get, and that's Josh Allen, 7th overall. So he's covered up a lot of those issues.
One
Nope.
more question for you.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
about Myles Garrett? Think the Bills are going to make the big trade for him?
You know what I would love to see? I would love to see Von Miller traded for Myles Garrett, and the Browns might be dumb enough to do it. This could be the Luka Doncic trade all over again. Yeah, trade Myles Garrett for Von Miller, and that could be the Browns. You convince them that you're saving face by acquiring a future Hall of Famer, and you get rid of a guy who wants off your roster. Von Miller can go there and get a couple more sacks and pad his Hall of Fame resume. What do you think? Good idea.
I think you might have to throw in a pick, but
And a 5th rounder,
yeah,
conditional 5th rounder.
and Kyrie Elam.
Sure, unload them all. Jonah, let's talk about Madison Francis before we talk about the Sabres. How big is this?
I think it's a pretty big deal. I think it's one of the rarest feats in sports. I mean, I don't know exactly what I would quantify it with or what else is things, but hole-in-ones or 500-foot home runs and things like that. I mean, women
Converting
dunking
a 7-10
basketball.
split in bowling.
Sure, women dunking a basketball. According to my research, only 12 women have done it in the WNBA or NCAA games. There's 8 in the WNBA
Wow.
and eight in NCAA, and 4 of those players, Brittany Griner, Candace Parker, and a couple others did it in both. So 12 different players that have done it at that level. There's more that have done it at the high school level, but not very many. From my research and my understanding and talking to different people, old newspaper reporters, or not that old, but people that have done it longer than me, and coaches and things like that, nobody can remember a Western New York athlete doing that. I mean, Madison Francis was trying to dunk in games last year, and it was the first time most people had ever seen someone even making the attempt. The last player to do it in New York State was Breanna Stewart, who's now been a 2-time WNBA MVP and WNBA Finals MVP, and she did it in the Syracuse area about 15, 14 years ago. And there's a couple other players that I came across that either dunked in a dunk contest or were known to be able to dunk the basketball, but never got a dunk in a game, in a high school game. So it's possible. It's a little bit like proving a negative, but at least with the available evidence and the different people I talked to, it's possible that Madison Francis and Breanna Stewart are the only girls basketball players in New York State history to dunk in a game.
What about the colleges? Like I don't know, NCCC or Damon. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to make you dig more, but
yeah, I mean, I can't think of a player who was even close to trying to dunk the basketball. I mean, maybe in practice, maybe with a volleyball or some sort of way. There have been women on some of these teams that could jump high enough to do it. And it might even be track athletes or volleyball athletes that could maybe do it. But actually dunking in a game, actually being close enough to miss a dunk in a game, I've never seen it. And I really can't think of a single player on any of the Big Four schools or any of the local colleges that had the ability to even think about trying to dunk the basketball. And Madison Francis told me that she first dunked the basketball as a freshman in practice and in working out with her brother. You know, her dad played basketball at Niagara. He's 6'10". Her brother was a really athletic player that was able to dunk at a rather young age. So she working out with them, they used to have little dunk contests. And she's also an excellent volleyball player
How
that
tall
jumps
is she?
6'1" is what she's listed at, and she's got pretty long arms. But 6'1" is pretty short for females dunking the basketball. I think from those 12 players that I found in NCAA or WNBA that have done it, one of them was 6'1" and one of them was 6 foot. The rest were all taller than that. But she's an excellent athlete, a very good volleyball player. Competed for the track and field team up until I think last summer or last spring. I believe she told me close to 40 feet in the triple jump, 5'6" in the high jump. So she has good athletic and jumping ability. I think the thing that kept her back from dunking was not being able to palm the basketball. But in this game, she was able to get just high enough to cram it over the rim and get that dunk. And it's been a big event. It was on ESPN SportsCenter Top 10. It was shared in a video on a huddle reel on TikTok that got over 1 million views. It happened on the night before National Women and Girls in Sports Day, which is kind of some nice timing. And then her Mississippi State coach, or who will be her coach when she goes to Mississippi State next year, Sam Purcell, had an interesting comment. You know, Madison Francis was picked for something, the Nike Hoop Summit out in Portland, Oregon at the end of the season. One of the 20 players in the country picked for that. But she wasn't picked for the McDonald's All-American game, which I think is 60 players maybe, or those are the finalists or whatever. I think it's maybe 30 for the game, but she wasn't picked for that. And he thought that that might have given her a little bit of edge, that if she was an inch away from dunking in these 10 or 12 times that she's missed dunks earlier in her career, and even earlier in that game Tuesday night, that not making that McDonald's All-American game got her a little bit of extra lift and got her to dunk that basketball the other night in a real kind of memorable, viral highlight moment that's been shared all around the country. And I think West New York basketball fans are going to be looking back on that video for a long, long time. And I don't know if this is the last time she's going to dunk. She was trying to get it in those Buff State sectional games last year in that arena and that platform with that crowd. And I think she'll try again when they're there this year. And, you know, I've never dunked a basketball, but I do know from reading and hearing stories and talking to people that sometimes with basketball players, once they get that first one, they start putting a lot more down after that.
Well, that's the thing I was going to make. So I couldn't do it. Now I was a high jumper and I high jumped in college and I was decent for my size. I 6'2", and you know, I high jumped 6'5" or 6'6", something let's say 6'5". I'll be conservative. You know, you get better. The older you are, the better you used to be, right? So let's say 6'5". I don't want to start, but I couldn't dunk because I had a problem with the ball. And for whatever reason, I couldn't transfer from the dribble to my hand. I couldn't do it. But anyways, when it came to high jumping, I had a problem my junior year with the 6-foot barrier. I could get the 5'10", I get the 5'11". I think my coach would even put it at 6 foot and tell me it was 5'11" or 5, and I couldn't do it. And then one day I did it. And the next meet I was at 6'4". I didn't even get to 6'2". I went from 6 foot to 6'4" somehow. And I think there's a mental barrier to it. It's like you get in your head. So yeah, I think that once you do something like that, you get over that. I think, yeah. So that'd be pretty cool if she just starts routinely dunking here in her final handful of games. How many more games do you have now at this point of the season?
I think she has 3 more regular season games and then sectionals. They're in a class with only 3 teams, so there won't be very many sectional games. I think they might even get a bye right into the finals. But they went to the state finals last year, so there'll be at least a few playoff games probably for Lancaster and more games locally. The regionals are here, so that's maybe another game that'll be played locally. And also,
there are a lot of breaks. There are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of breakaways in the girls' high school game.
Yeah, and she gets them. She gets steals and she gets out on the break, trying for these type of plays often. And she's not just a tall player that can dunk the basketball. She's a good all-around player, dribbles the ball very well, has made, I think, 34 3-pointers this season and passes the ball pretty well. She's a bit of an inside out, might even be maybe a perimeter player in the college game, even though she's the tallest player on the floor usually here in high school. And, just a very talented player. I mean, I thought Amari DeBerry coming out of Williamsville South a couple of years ago was going to be a professional WNBA player. It didn't work out that way. There's a lot of excellent basketball players coming out of West New York in recent years playing at high-level colleges, but there hasn't been a local that's made it to the WNBA level yet. And Madison Francis seems to be the best chance of that caliber of player coming out of this area and ever, but also, going forward, I think.
Jonah, the Sabres have won 4 straight. Don't look now, but they are thinking about getting out of the basement. They still have, I saw a tweet, I think it was Nate Geary from WGR, was they upped the percentage chance of the asteroid that's supposed to hit Earth in 10 years or so. It's now up to 2.2%. And he said that there's a greater chance of an asteroid hitting the Earth than the Sabres to make the playoffs. I thought that was a pretty good line. But they've won 4 in a row. One of the wins was a Pyrrhic victory in which they lost in many other ways, in many symbolic ways. It was a loss when Tage Thompson took that hit and nobody responded. You've been around the locker room. You've been in the press box. You've been covering some of these games. What's your I always ask about the vibe, but I think that's what I like talking about. I like where are people? Where are people with this team, including the people who work for it and show up to these games and maybe even wear the sweater?
Yeah, well, it was a strange vibe coming out of that game last Sunday when they did win the game. They didn't respond well to the Tage Thompson hit. They didn't respond at all. There was kind of a shaky vibe, is how I would call it, and different explanations from different players and even Lindy Ruff. Not a real coherent message about why the Sabres didn't respond or why they were unable to respond in the right moment. Some players said, and even Lindy Ruff said that they needed to win the game, and then they gave up the shorthanded goal and didn't want to sacrifice the 2 points, but they're a last place team that's not going to make the playoffs. I mean, I think defending your best player, your best forward, and establishing your team culture and not being a team that gets run over by another team is more important than where the Sabres are in the standings and getting that win. But then they caught up a couple days later and had the proper response and got in that fighting another
That's all
team.
bullshit.
Well, but I think for the culture of the team and within that locker room, and also I think Alex
But if
Tuck,
that's the type of thing that gets you off, I don't want to sit and get, all right. If that gives any kind of reconciliation or any kind of if that makes up for what happened 2 days before in their minds, then that's pathetic. Because it's like it's just like Neanderthal knuckle dragger thinking. I get that there needs to be a fight, but it was staged practically. I mean, Dennis Gilbert went out there and he was going to have a fight and he was going to show, I don't know, who are they showing it to? Are they trying to prove it to themselves? Are they trying to prove it to the fans? Are they trying to prove it to their coach? I don't know well, is Lindy Ruff daring them to get into a fight?
To Tage Thompson, maybe a little bit, maybe to other teams that even though they were slow to respond, it was a delayed response. They didn't respond properly in the first game. That I think it was a makeup call in a way by this team to recognize that they didn't respond the right way in the previous game.
I think in some ways it makes it sadder.
In some ways it makes it funnier, I think, and very Sabres-y. But I think it shows that the next time the Sabres kind of learn their lesson and that the next time they're going to respond differently, and maybe they won't. And
Dennis Gilbert pairing up with that guy, and he's like, "Hey, somebody beat our ass the last game, so we're coming for you now." Be like, "What the fuck did I do?"
And Alex Tuck, who seems to be a player who was maybe the most unhappy with the lack of response, and he's been a line mate at Tage Thompson's for most of their time together here in Buffalo, and is not skating on the same line with him right now. And I think maybe, Sabres had the wrong players on the ice at that point in time. Now, could they have gone out and put the checking line out there and had a 5-on-5 brawl like they did against the Ottawa Senators many years ago right after that? Maybe that's what they should have done. But I think the message came from guys like Alex Tuck and Dennis Gilbert that if they were on the ice at that point in time, they would have handled it differently, and that the Sabres recognized the error in their slow response, and that if they're in that situation again, I think the message they're trying to send is that they'll handle it better and more properly. And I think Lindy Ruff had a role in, making sure that the Sabres showed 2 days later that they were capable of doing what they did not do in the previous game.
Yeah, those are the stories that we're into. I mean, it's a 4-game win streak, which is nice, but the season is so lost that a moment grabs the headlines for an entire week over a hit that wasn't responded to.
Well,
And
and it happened 2 nights after they put Rob Ray in the Hall of Fame, Sabres Hall of
right, yeah,
Fame,
I'm
and
glad
had
you mentioned that.
him and all these different players making testimonials about having each other's back and how important Rob Ray was as an enforcer and as a tough guy and as a team culture guy. And not just him, Matthew Barnaby and Brad May and Adam Mayer and Andrew Peters and different players that came along in his era and shortly after. And Lindy Ruff's first tenure as a coach. And the Sabres seem to be lacking those type of players right now. And the league doesn't have very many of those players right now. But a lot of fans have said the Sabres have lacked toughness over the years, and it's some of the reasons why they're in this playoff drought. And it kind of showed that even when they play winning hockey, Tage Thompson is the reason they won that game, too. He had 2 goals and assists, got them a 4-1 lead. They almost gave it away and lost again. And, they are missing that element. And Dennis Gilbert provided that. And maybe he's not the best person for that. Maybe the Sabres need more toughness and more spots in the lineup and from players that are a little more skilled and on the ice more often than Dennis Gilbert is. But then Dennis Gilbert also had a nice pass to set up one of Alex Tuch's goals. So it was, from a narrative standpoint, a nice response for the Sabres. But yeah, as you mentioned, doing it 2 nights later against a completely different team is a little bit of a hollow victory.
12 points out of a wild card spot, despite their hot streak. Other teams have finally passed them in games played, which is, I guess, good for them. They they did have more games played there for a while and put them at yet a greater disadvantage mathematically for any shot of making the playoffs. But there was a point I was going to make based off of playoff. So normally you'd say this 4-game win streak is pretty meaningless when you're winning and yet still treading water in the standings, maybe even sliding back. I remember, what was it, 8 points when we were having this discussion maybe a month ago about how if these
5
guys,
not that long ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they're playing well and still falling backwards because everybody else is playing better. So you'd say, wow, 4-game win streak's pretty irrelevant, but I'll tell you how it isn't. I'll tell you how it is relevant. If anybody was thinking about firing the general manager during the 4 Nations break, it's kind of tough to do now, right?
Yeah. I mean, maybe they lose a game here, it changes some of that climate, but especially if they go into the break on a 5-game win streak. And I don't think this means that the general manager has done a good job or has done the best job or that this team is having a successful season. But if you take out that 13-game win streak, and I realize that's, you can't just take out your worst 13 games. And if you take out the worst 13-game stretch of every team, they're all going to have pretty good records. But if you take that 13-game month-long stretch when they played like the worst team in the league and, extrapolate the points percentage in the other 40 games, it comes out to a 94, 95 point place, which also is probably not good enough to get into the playoffs, but it's very close. So the Sabres, while they're having another disappointing season, they are in last place. They are going to miss the playoffs. There's something wrong with the makeup of this roster that needs to be fixed in the offseason, or maybe even at this trade deadline if they can get a head start on that. But they haven't played like the worst team in hockey or the worst team in the Eastern Conference all season long. They've had stretches of good hockey. They've had stretches of average hockey. They're, as a young team, they're still finding their way, figuring out how to play under Lindy Ruff. I think Lindy Ruff is still figuring out a little bit about this team and who can do what for them. And it's similar to what it was, I guess 3 years ago now when they finished strong and you had some hope going into the season because they played at a 100-point pace over the last third of the season when the pressure was off and it wasn't as important and it didn't mean as much. But there's reasons to think that there is something here that because I do think there's changes that need to be made, and maybe that starts with the front office and then goes on down. But this isn't a rock bottom situation or a team that needs to be blown up and totally started over. They have some of the pieces. They just need to figure out a way to turn these pieces, to develop these pieces and get better and add to it and take that next step. I don't think that trading everybody away and sliding back and rebuilding in the draft is what this franchise needs to do. And yeah, they
You're
just
starting to
won
sound
4
like an
games at home.
apologist, Jonah.
Well, I just mean that they won 4 in a row at home. They scored 18 goals in those games, so they've shown that there is something there. And I don't think they should be trading away all their good young players and starting over again. But in some ways that's easier to do than figure out what they actually should be able to do and what players they can add and how they can get better from here.
Yeah, I had a point to make, but it evaporated. It wafted right out of my head. Oh, I was going to ask you about the anonymous player poll that the Athletic recently did, and Lindy Ruff got some votes for player or a coach you would least like to play for. And there was a quote from a player saying that he hears from his friends in Buffalo that the coach is out of touch and doesn't understand hockey anymore. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
Then again, it was an Athletic anonymous player poll in which Josh Allen was voted most overrated. So the Pete Gwelly and Terry Pagula might not put any weight in what's being said in anonymous player polls.
I mean, I like Lindy Ruff covering him, and I think his place in Sabres culture. I think he's brought an element that this Sabres team needed, that they were asking for in their exit interviews last year. But I do think that's maybe a criticism of Lindy Ruff that goes back to his last tenure at the Sabres and why he was let go the first time and why he was fired from jobs in Dallas and New Jersey. And he is an older coach, and maybe in some ways he has an older style, and some players in the NHL might feel like the game has passed him by. But I think the Sabres at this point, with this roster, he's the right coach for them in the moment.
John Tortorella won that, finger quotes, won that category. But he also received votes, John Tortorella did, for coach you'd most like to play for other than your own. So found that interesting.
And how many of these anonymous players are just trying to be chaos agents and say the wackiest thing because they know it's not tied to their name, and maybe there's ulterior motives for some of those statements.
I've always found them to be genuine, but that's not to say, I mean, that's just my little sample size from when I've done anonymous player polls over the years. They generally take them seriously, but yeah, who's to say? You'll never know. Joan, anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
Not really. Damon basketball is still undefeated, 19-0.
Still number 2 in the country, right?
Still number 2 in the country.
All right.
Canisius Niagara play each other this coming week, and that's a big game.
All right. Sounds like we're wrapping it up here. You want to give a pick for the game? The big game, capital B, capital G? Probably a capital T.
Yeah, I picked
the big
the
game.
City Chiefs to three-peat. I think that all year long they've been a team that they didn't win all the games, but they won all but one of the games that mattered, and they find a way to win. I'd like to root for the Jamestown guy, Nick Sirianni, coaching the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles are probably better than they were when they played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. But until I did see the Bills beat the Chiefs, but other than that, I mean, I just don't see the Chiefs losing here in this run. And I think winning 3 in a row maybe helps the Bills next year if they see the Chiefs again in the playoffs. This is maybe the top of the mountain for the Chiefs, and if they were to lose this game, it might reset their motivation and make them slightly harder for the Bills to beat in a potential playoff rematch a year from now. Because I do think the Bills are going to the Super Bowl next year.
Okay.
I just think that the narrative and the scripted nature of the NFL, that the last year in the stadium, the last game is going to be
scripted.
The AFC Championship. Bills win it.
Yeah, help sell tickets, get season tickets sold for the new stadium.
Tear down the goalpost. It's going to be a memorable experience, and the Bills needed to lose all these playoff games in order to get to that culminating moment. If this was a sports movie, the Bills don't win that game in Kansas City last week. They lose it, and they win next year at home.
This makes it more believable and more dramatic. You're right. I am picking the Chiefs also, and maybe this is classic recency bias, but I think that I'm leaning into it a little bit. Is I've seen the Chiefs beat an elite opponent recently. You take a look at the Eagles; they haven't beaten an elite team for about 2 months, 2.5 months, going back to Baltimore towards the, towards the middle of the season, I guess, second half of the season. And they had an easy path. They didn't have to face Detroit or Minnesota. And that's not to say that they didn't beat quality teams. Everybody who gets into the playoffs does, but is a good team. But they also had to win 3 games. And the Chiefs have had 2 of their last 4 weeks have been off. Now the Eagles also have a week off last week, getting ready for the Super Bowl, because you got that had a built-in break. But the Chiefs had the first round bye plus another week. I mean, they're healthy. They seem sharp. They haven't been rusty. Didn't look rusty from regular season finale through that first round bye into the first game. Well, against Houston, maybe they looked a little rusty, but they certainly didn't look like they had any problems against the Bills. So anyways, I just think they have they seem to be humming.
Before we get out of here, do you want my hottest take?
Absolutely.
Even though it's kind of a lukewarm take, I don't hate the Luka Doncic trade for the Mavericks.
No?
No.
Why not?
Well, I don't love it. And, maybe this isn't the hottest take because I heard Shaq and some other people kind of say the same thing. But I think there's a basketball reasoning that in the short term, the Mavs, if they're not better, they're not worse, with Anthony Davis being a defensive center that fits with Kyrie Irving a little bit better than another ball-dominant point guard who's a bit weak on defense. And if they think it improves their team culture, and it definitely will improve their defense, and Anthony Davis is a top 10 player when he's healthy, a good offensive player, and a taller player, which matters in that sport. I don't love it because I do think the Mavericks should have gotten more draft capital from the Lakers and didn't extract maybe full value of what they could get for a top 5 all-around player in Luka Doncic. But I kind of think that the Mavericks might come out okay in the short term from this trade, and maybe a way to split the baby and trade Anthony Davis for those draft picks that they didn't get at a later date.
All right. We will watch it unfold, and I will think of you every time I decide to gander on the who's doing what and who's winning the trade.
Yeah. Do you have a prediction on what song Kendrick Lamar is going to open up his halftime set list with?
Nope. Do you?
All right. Yeah, I do have a prediction.
What is it?
Well, I think that the song everybody wants to hear is Not Like Us. Won the
Right.
Grammy.
But isn't that a bit controversial? Do you think the
It
NFL will
is,
be
yes.
like, would you please let's stay away from that?
Yep. And I think he might, but I actually think they are going to play that song. I mean, it won the Grammy, and it is, a very popular song. I think there might be a way he performs that song without performing some of the most incendiary lyrics about Drake. But I think he's going to tease that song at the very beginning, going to play the first few bars of it because it is the beat and the melody that's really popular in that song. And then they're going to switch into a different song, a song called
Because
TGAF.
it's always a montage.
Yeah, it's always a montage. And then it's going to close with Not Like Us and everybody dancing on the stage like they did in the California concert. And, might have some NBA players out there dancing with them because that's what happened in Los Angeles.
Are you gonna? Can you bet on that? You probably can.
You can bet on that, but I don't think you can bet on the teasing the first few bars of one song.
Yeah, is that the first? Yeah, what is it? What's officially the first song?
Well, I guess it would be the one that gets teased, even if it's only a few seconds.
Those types of bets, I think, aren't permissible in New York.
Yeah, there's a lot of things
because somebody like if you're on the band, like if you're in the band or on the stage, the sound crew or whatever, what the winner's going to be, and you could bet.
Yeah, we got an email, a PR email about Josh Allen being the betting favorite for MVP, and clicking through to it, you weren't even really able to make that bet, at least in New York, and I don't know about anywhere. A lot of times these odds come out for entertainment purposes only, or really to just plant stories in the media to get people talking about odds and the ability to bet. And I don't know too many people in real life that make bets on who's going to win the MVP or what song's going to be played. You can do these prop bet pools and things like that with the Super Bowl, but
color of the
real
Gatorade
gamblers,
and the length of the national anthem, and
yeah, but
the
real
first
gamblers
commercial
don't do
be
that.
a car insurance or tech or I don't know, beer.
Well,
all right, Jonah, you have a good weekend now. Thanks to everybody out there for listening and watching Tim Graham and Friends. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, all the things. And we will see you on the other side of the Super Bowl.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.